Ecstasy is another word for ecstasis, or breaking outside of the known. As we come into the world, we are bound tighter and tighter into the lens of our cult, of our culture. And every culture in human history has been somewhat asymmetrical, somewhat biased, overcompensating in some way for events in the past. And as a result, in terms of the symmetry of the possibility field, certain things in any given culture are overdeveloped and certain things are suppressed, ignored, marginalized, shamed. And so within any cult framework, you get a shape something like this, or represented by something that's a little bit odd, and it's definitely limited. A cult's primary job, a culture's primary job, is to protect its participants from the fear of the unknown, from the chaos of uncertainty, by providing a set of narrow channels and memes that everyone agrees to operate by, even if they're a little bit crazy. You're going to ask me how I'm doing. I'm going to tell you I'm fine. Neither one of us are going to think about it. Why? Why even ask the question? Because it's a cult meme. I'm going to say, when you ask at a job interview that I love teamwork and whatever else is the current meme of the day, why? Why does the job market seek that in the first place? It's not rational. It's a meme. It's a habit. And that's really what cults do, is they establish an overemphasis on a couple of traits, hopefully with some reference to something in the past or fantasy about the future that has some relevance. And then we coach people on how to ask the questions that emphasize those values or traits, and then we coach everyone else how to answer correctly. This is what the correct job interviewer is going to ask, and this is what the up and coming, the correct, etc., and even the up and coming. Why the up and coming? You know, it's an American trait, whereas traditional, that which has been a little bit more of a British trait. So it's or an ancient Thai trait. So cults all have their focus. They all have their emphasis, and the individuals, as a statistic within those cults, take the shape of the cult. Now, ecstasy is the transcendence of the cult. It is the transcendence of the status quo. It is the transcendence of the norm, the violation, the breaking out of the individual. It is the breaking out of habit into something beyond. And in that state, and it's worth mentioning that 99.9% of all reality is outside of the cult. Now, when we agree and to live our lives within a very, very small portion of the time continuum and of the geographic continuum, and mostly talk with people who largely agree with us, we can have the illusion that our cult, that our little bubble, is extraordinarily big. But one only needs to fly halfway around the world to discover that there are millions and millions of people who think very differently than we do on a whole variety of subjects. One only needs to go outside one's political party to find that there's just as passionate opinions on the other side. One just has to go outside of our planet. One have estimated 1 billion planets in just our universe alone to discover exactly how tiny our little part in the timescape, in the geography, in the cultscape really is. There have been 10,000 cults in human history, according to anthropologists. Most of them have long gone. Every one of them thought that they were right. Well, what are the odds? What are the odds that out of 9,000 or 10,000 cults in human history, that our cult, the one that says dress like this, talk like this, don't talk like this, have sex like this, don't have sex like this, believe this, don't believe that, what are the odds that our cult actually is the right one? Well, statistically, they're 1 in 10,000. But every cult is naturally self-absorbed and thinks it is the right way. And we migrate to cults in part because the trauma that is often associated with certain ventures out into the unknown terrifies us to some degree, that we retreat into the safety of normalcy. However insane, it is predictable, and in that sense it calms us down. But 99.9% of all reality is outside of our known terrain. It's outside of our cult, it's outside of our timescape, it's outside of our geography. It does not adhere to our value hierarchy. And so we have the individual shape of our cult, of our family, of our belief system, etc. And then we have the vast majority of reality that's out there. And within the out there, of course, is bliss, is terror, is growth, is loneliness, is stuff beyond our imagination, is stuff we've never done before. And one of the interesting aspects of trauma is that it is a forced violation of the status quo. If it feels normal, safe, and familiar, whether it's a beating or whatever, it isn't trauma. Trauma, by definition, is a mass of energy that seems big enough and unknown enough to threaten our sense of survival in some way. And as such, it is generally forced upon us. It's counterintuitive for an individual to say, I'm going to throw myself into extraordinary amounts of pain that I don't understand, violation, etc., and just be completely flooded, because it's a very unpleasant state to be thrust violently into some large form of energy. So the experience of trauma is in many ways an uncontrolled, not chosen, meaning we didn't choose it, it was uncontrolled, thrusting into some area of the unknown, into something bigger than we're comfortable with. And so we experience that landscape of the unknown as painful, as terrifying, as uncertain, as overwhelming. Much as, one could think of if you just took a random person and put them into, an isolation tank where they don't really know what's going on, but a sensory deprivation tank, it's an unknown experience. And if you put someone in there without their consent, without their understanding of the parameters and stuff like that, it might be absolutely terrifying. What's going on? If you shove psychedelics into an individual, again, what's going on? I don't know when this is going to end, all of this type of stuff. And so there's all kinds of introductions to the vastness of the unknown that when they are not voluntary, when they are not understood, and when they're not regulated, meaning we're not controlling how much and at what pace they're going on, they are profoundly traumatic events. Sexuality, another example. If you're in control and you understand the pros and cons, and you have a lot of certainty and you know what to expect and what not to expect and what the risks and stuff are, often people get quite creative and, as in the case of BDSM, bondage, discipline, domination, submission, etc., there is often quite a curiosity. If I'm in control, if I'm regulating the intensity, if I'm in control, if I know the parameters, etc., then I might want to go into that terrain for intensity or arousal or curiosity or pleasure or any number of things. Deep bonding experience stimulating adrenaline or endorphins. These are voluntary and regulated entrances into the unknown. And, they are adventures, they are new experiences, variety, and all of that. The plunging into those same terrain, rather than, being handcuffed by a chosen trusted lover, being handcuffed by a raping kidnapper who you've never met before, etc. The same terrain can be profoundly traumatic and induce PTSD because it's not regulated, it's not chosen, there's no sense of control. And so the reason that I mention this is there's an interesting phenomena. If you can imagine being brainwashed into this shape within one's own psyche and within the larger framework of human probability, trauma is a rupture of the status quo. And if one finds oneself in PTSD, one may be in a tape loop, in an endless loop of a ruptured status quo, finding oneself deeply enmeshed in parts of the psyche, in parts of the mental, emotional, physical landscape of our probability field that is unfamiliar, that is overwhelming, that doesn't feel regulated and in our control, and as such will be experienced as trauma. However, the unknown is by definition neutral, meaning all growth, all evolution, all new inventions, all new experience, most of the future lies in the unknown. 50 years ago, cell phones, Wi-Fi, and all that was all in the unknown. If you didn't know that cameras could record you and stuff, and you didn't know the limits of that, they might be terrifying. Cars driving past one another at 140 miles an hour within a few feet of distance, on the opposite sides of yellow lines, might be absolutely terrifying if you just popped into the car and had no context and didn't understand that everyone agreed to be on the right side of the road and what's the fatality rate. If you don't know, does half this population die every day from car crashes, or is it one per 100,000? If you don't know that context, suddenly being thrust into some future environment is profoundly traumatic. But within the unknown, you also you have goodness, you have fear, pain. You also have all future knowledge, and it's worth knowing that 99.9% of all knowledge lies in the domain of the unknown, and in the unknown, the unknown that we don't even know that we don't know, because our limited sense of knowledge doesn't have a big enough window to grasp exactly how ignorant we are about any number of things. Now, if we understand that our future lies out in the unknown, and we understand that the biggest difference between trauma, violation, pain, terror, etc., and growth and evolution is whether that process of venturing out into the unknown is controlled or done in violation, not regulated. Then one of the things that becomes obvious is that those who are seemingly insane, those who are very different, those who are traumatized, are in the landscape that is outside the cult boundary, and often in some degree of dissociation, lack of regulation, and pain. But this is one of the reasons why the line between genius and insanity is so close, because those are the same landscapes that seekers in consciousness, therapeutic explorations in psychedelics, meditation, philosophy, poetry, future inventions, mathematics, intuitions, they are also in the same landscape. However, they are not being explored in overwhelming terror and violation. They're being explored by conscious exploration, and that's the distinction. Now, why is it valuable to look through this lens? So, we're in here, and generally, particularly a cult that has experienced a fair amount of pain and isolation and trauma likes to stay in the unknown. And so it's like, I don't want to do anything too uncomfortable. And so we're in this shape, and we're in this comfortable terrain, and the traumatic event violates our comfort zone and sends us somewhere out there into the vast domains of consciousness. And there we are, out there. And we realize we don't know what we're doing. We realize we're out of control. And we realize that our body is reacting uncontrollably to this boundarylessness. And it's very, very difficult in that state to, transition into bliss and all of that. However, as we successfully resolve the trauma, as life continues, we're not dead, obviously. I'm not a ghost, you're not a ghost, so we're here so far. As life continues, the fear goes down over time. It's like whether it's desensitization, whether we're thrust out there, but the more we spend time in some new part of our own being, some new area within our probability field, the more we get to know it. I remember when my pain and loneliness and fear jacked up 700% in a matter of days. And I didn't know what that meant. It was obviously terrifying and painful as hell. Was I going to die? Was this the end? Was I just going to numb out because there was so much pain? What was going on there? But, as several years went by, it's like I'm still here. I now know what 700% more pain is. What is that pain about? Why? What brought it about? And so then becomes, as a calming down occurs, because I'm not dead. Then the pivot goes from one of reactive fear and get away from me to what is out here and why. And this is where, reactivity and terror and all that can transition to genius by mapping this new terrain that in many ways is virgin terrain, certainly for you, but at times for parts of your cult or culture, because no one voluntarily went out there. And you got thrust out there. You got hurled into this domain. And then the question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to shut down? Are you going to block it out? Are you going to try and never talk about it again, or are you going to start mapping the landscape into which you were thrust or entered? And this is the terrain of post-traumatic growth. So everyone who is or has been traumatized has been thrust into the dark face of ecstasy, ecstasis. They lost the stasis and found themselves spinning to some degree in unknown terrain. Overwhelming, painful, frightening, whatever, but unknown terrain. And all of us that are watching this video are still here. We made it. It didn't actually kill us. Now our body may still be pumping like mad and saying we're going to die, we're going to die. Our psychology may be pumping like mad, saying whatever happens, I never want to feel that way again. Don't ever do this. I'm going to ban, people. I'm going to never have sex again. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that because I can't deal with this. And, and certainly some parts of the psyche, our inner child, our adolescent, it's just too big. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm overwhelmed with freedom. I'm overwhelmed with the lack of boundary within myself and within the world. I can't face the responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond to all this. So this is what's going on, and I'm out here. And there we have it. So with this initiation, which is already happened, because this is another interesting thing. As part of the initiation from childhood to adult, many of our cults in human history sent our young people out into a traumatic environment, out into ecstasy. The uncertainty, would they come back? For example, some tribes would send their young people out into the wilderness for 3 weeks, a month, whatever. And if they couldn't survive, they died. But if they could survive and came back to the village, they had now passed through ecstasy. They had broken away from the pattern of the village. They'd faced the fear of death. They'd mastered the terrain and were coming back to the tribe as an adult. You can see a very small example of this in some of the Joseph Campbell mythologies, or traditions in certain movies where they show this. But there's a facing of death. And the idea is you cannot truly be a mature, independent adult until you have gone outside of your cult. The cult of your own ego, the cult of your own fears, the cult of your culture's dogmas, the cult of the status quo. That you have gone outside the boundary. 2, that you have looked in from the outside. You've survived it. 2, you've survived it. 3, you've looked in from the outside. 4, you are no longer bound by the boundaries of your brainwashed cult. And 5, you have a conscious and mediated commerce with the unknown. You're now looking out rather than just looking in. And now you have the possibility to contribute the most value to your species, to your family, to your own life, to your own expanded consciousness. And for better and for worse, there's a trade-off with most things, for better and for worse, our cult has taken away a lot of these sacred and beautiful initiations and replaced it with certain sadistic initiations like high school or bullying or something of that nature, and trauma. And so we have this interesting thing where the coddled individual would be taken from cradle to grave without ever stepping outside their cult. where their cult assumptions are coddled, etc., and they never have the sense of something transcendent that's truly great and grand. And in this process, this kind of cute, uninterrupted coddling is unconsciously disrupted with the phenomena of trauma, which could be seen as a violent and unconscious initiation into the unknown. Now, my thought is, if you're out in there floating around terrified, not sure what is and isn't sane, not sure where language begins and this, that, a lot of things unspoken. If you're out there floating around because you've been thrust there through some traumatic event or injury, and then there is the possibility over time of mapping out the terrain, of making discoveries. It kind of be as if someone violently threw you out into this area of the solar system. Well, of course, it'd be very hard to breathe, it'd be very cold, it'd be very dark, it would be terrifying, it would be lonely. And if you make it back into the Earth's atmosphere alive, you've seen things that no one else has seen. Some of which could advance science, some of which could advance, the richness and various forms of the species' growth and development. And the piercing of the membrane in one moment in time and in one thing, through repeated trauma, such as the piercing of the membrane of the status quo, of the cult, makes it weaker, builds a deeper sense of awareness of how much of reality is outside the familiar terrain. And in doing so, can allow us to travel out there again with more fluidity, with more humility, with more courage, perhaps, because we survived. If we're still alive, we survived. If we're dead, we didn't survive, but we're still, you and I, we're still here as of today, as of this moment. And so there's not, because we are so trauma illiterate, there is no great roadmap to taking unconscious or conscious trauma and transforming it into post-traumatic growth. That is one of the things that I'm interested in mapping, meaning that's one of the bigger things that I set out to navigate around this, is how would someone in our cult get back in a way that would contribute value to their own life and to the lives of others if they found themselves in this particular predicament. And so that led to a lot of mapping activity, the whole MAPS project on happiness data, the process of reiterating a growing human, another whole video series, the YouTube channel on taboo emotions and taboo states, understanding what how the understanding the chemistry of hate and how to create hate and dismantle hate. Another exploration around that. What I want to leave you with in closing this is the fact that the unknown, meaning outside of our comfort zone and boundaries, is neutral in the abstract, which means that 1,000 years from now, most of what's going on within the species will be far outside the bounds of what is here now, in the domain that is currently unknown, and which over time, with mastery and growth and stretching and muscles, will become the masterful known. And in being the masterful known, 99% of all our wealth, all our beauty, truth, and goodness, everything that we're excited about in the day is currently out there in the unknown. Everything wonderful is currently in the unknown. And the success and growth of a species is how many people venture intelligently in the unknown. Now, trauma is not terribly intelligent, but it is in the unknown. And my question to you is, if you're going to be thrust out there from time to time, you're going to find yourself facing nightmares that you can't face currently. You can't face them currently. Facing thoughts that you don't know the answer to currently. Facing possibilities that seem terrifying and ungrounded currently. Might there be an opportunity at some point to map this out to, in a sense, very similar to if you'd been going along in your normal commuter route and some great force picked you up and hurled you 5,000 miles away into the jungle. This is an absolute traumatic event. But you are also one of the few people to be out there in the jungle where there's no map. And on the way home, you may discover medicinal plants. You may discover new words need to be invented to describe the things that you see that no one in your family or your cult has seen. And by the time you get back, if you make it back successfully, the hero's journey, you may have perspectives that are rich and valuable that no one else has. Now, in a dogmatic cult, you may be feared yourself. You may be viewed as a threat to the cult because you've been outside the walls. You can see beyond the bounds, and that is a threat to the status quo. So in unevolved and rudimentary cults, and certainly many parts of our own fit that description, you will find yourself to be a feared and resisted element in the cult that challenges the status quo with more complexity than the simple-minded ignorance that is self-perpetuating, that we are this way because we are this way because we are this way. And this is one of the reasons travel is such an exciting and enriching experience in transforming a cult. And trauma is a form of travel. So you have the opportunity. The odds may be against you if you're in terror and and anxiety and all that. But you have the opportunity to pivot from fear and overwhelm and all that to curiosity, to enrichment, to the unknown, to wonder, to emotions you've never felt before, to understanding, to learning from pain, to learning from fear, to learning from dread, to learning from horror, what they can teach. And as with all polarities and emotions, learning the opposite. Because if you know how to torment someone with exquisite trauma, you also know how to induce ecstatic bliss with respect, because they both require intense feelings, intense attention to detail, a sense of planning and schedule, a sense of intimacy. And one implies the possibility of the other. Probability fields go out in all directions, meaning there's positive and negative potential. And so part of the trauma wheel, part of the circle of trauma, is the understanding that horror and love are very closely linked. They're very nearby. That joyful ecstasy and traumatic ecstasy are in the same landscape. It's just the difference from going for a nice swim out in the ocean and knowing how to swim and knowing what the ocean is, and being hurled out into the ocean without knowing how to swim and no one to help you, and you're turning under. And the question is, are you going to learn to swim before you go under? You're in the same ocean. You just have no sense of control and regulation when you are severely traumatized against your will. The landscape itself, though, is neutral. And for some of us, at some point, we may find that we can turn from running away from the unknown to get back to the familiar as quickly as possible because we've been terrorized and overstimulated and shamed and all of that. To leaning back and learning as we maybe more slowly make our way back to normalcy, or make our way back to normalcy and then consciously come back into the same terrain. Understanding that the terrains of the psyche and the terrains of the natural environment are both neutral, and that for the species to grow and for us to grow, we will need to go deeper and deeper into the unknown and develop intimacy and mastery. And I want to say thank you at some level and wish you good luck, because the species probability field expands. The more anomalous experiences are participated in, positive and negative. And the growth and knowledge of the species expands as we go out into the unknown, willingly or unwillingly, ecstatically into bliss or traumatically into pain. The knowledge of the species grows dramatically as we enter ecstasy in one form or another. Good luck in coming home, coming back to yourself, and finding a way to work with this new terrain that can benefit your own life, can benefit those you care about, and our planet and species as a whole. And though I don't wish a violent and unnecessary trauma upon you, if you are out there, I wish you a conscious journey home with the mindset that you could make a terrific discovery that is so big that nobody even knows that they don't know it, that you don't know that you don't know it. So keep your eyes open. Make notes. Document the journey. Graph it out. Look at what's going on. Try and understand it from within the cult, from your own past experience, but also what might it look like from other angles through different value systems, and what opportunities. In Chinese, the symbol for crisis and opportunity is the same, because it's the difference between, you're in the same landscape, it's new. So is it a crisis, is it an opportunity? It all depends on your perspective. If you're overwhelmed, terrified, and it's coming too fast for you to grasp and it could kill you, it's a crisis. If you're in the same terrain, and you know what you're doing and you can respond fast and you're learning rapidly, it's an opportunity. Take care.